Hello everyone. Today you're going to see Francis Adyanga, who's from Uganda, and I, who's from South Africa, talking mainly about relational research, but also relationality in general, and how it is useful for the common good in communities and in society as a whole. Francis, do you want to say a little bit about yourself and your way of thinking about relationality?
Yeah, thank you so much, Norma. Like Norma said, my name is Francis Akena Adyanga. I am from Uganda, and I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Education at Kampala University, actively in teaching, research, and community engagement. I would like to say, first of all, thank you to our listeners and the audience who are listening in today online from different parts of the world. I am so grateful that we are participating in this conversation about relationality in practices. Basically, for us in the academia, our practices are in teaching, research, and community engagement. So that whole notion of how do we then relate with those with whom we engage is so important in this. And it's also important that I give credit to the Taos Institute for inviting Norma and I to have this conversation. So I'm really excited, and I look forward to digging a little bit deeper.
Right.
Back to you.
Back to me.
Yes.
So I'm from South Africa, as I said, and I'm actually officially retired now, but I'm still involved in the Department of Adult Community and Continuing Education, again with a concentration on research and relational research practices in various fields, and of course relating to communities.
Yeah.
So the way I'm related to the Taos Institute is because in 2019, Ken Gergen, who was the founder of the Institute a long time ago, asked a few of us from the Institute to create a video explaining our involvement in the Institute and also our relational practices. So that's what we'll be talking about today. As we've been saying, we're more involved in relational research, being so-called positioned in academia, and of course that also means working beyond academia with communities. Relational research has been explained very well, especially by Indigenous scholars who talk about the Indigenous research paradigm, which is all about nurturing relational principles. And it implies a relational ontology where things are seen to exist only in relation. So things don't exist independently of each other. All entities and people and rocks and everything in the world all exist in relation. By way of relationship. Yeah. So that's the ontology. And the epistemology means we know together. Knowing happens, again, in relation, where people develop insights together. And in terms of axiology, we're accountable to all our relations, and in the research context, it's the relations in the research context. And methodology, a relational methodology, is where it's understood that research participants have to be involved in all stages of the research process. I want to quickly mention that Ken Gergen has expressed in most of his writings, in fact probably all of his writings, the ontology of relationality. And he actually gives credence to various cultural heritages outside of the Western heritage, which have explored this idea of things existing in relation. He's written a lovely book called Relational Being, which is all about this relational ontology. And he's also helped us to better appreciate, indeed, even the Ubuntu notion, which he refers to in some of his books, the Ubuntu notion, which says, translated into English, I am because we are. Yeah. Maybe you can say a bit more about that, Francis.
Yeah, thank you so much, Norma. I want to first reflect on the conversation we had at the Taos Institute. Was it in 2022?
2022. There was a
big
conference, in November.
Yeah, November.
There was a big conference organized by the Taos Institute.
Yes.
And we participated together in a particular session, which was hosted by Sally St. George and Dan Welf. And they invited us with another person called David Gallant to talk about research in multiple worlds.
Right.
So you can refer to that. Yes.
Yeah, that's what I want. That's what I was referring to. Thank you for reminding me. So I just wanted to say that was that online conversation was cutting edge. It generated a lot of ideas about the whole notion of relationality in research and practices. Now, besides appreciating the cutting-edge conversation that arose therein. I found the conversation also, the trajectory of the conversation blending into what we call indigenous conversational approach, which integrates the aspect of ontological, epistemological, axiological, and methodological in the process of conducting research, in the process of teaching, in the process of our professional engagement and the way we relate with one another and generating social relationship broadly. Now, our session specifically, which had myself from Uganda, you from South Africa, then we had David from Australia, Melbourne, Australia.
Yes.
This session was moderated by Sally and Dan, right? Yeah, I think that session, Dan and Sally did, in practice, demonstrated what exactly we mean by relationship construction and building, because they allowed the conversation to flow naturally and organically without imposing any time limitation. I found that very rich because in that way we were able to generate ideas based on our past experiences, based on what we are doing now, and based on the projection that we have, that we set and where the society is going. And now, because they demonstrated care in terms of how we generate ideas and knowledge, I think that fit into the idea of that I am because we are. The collective knowing, the collective generation of knowledge and ideas, and then the collective application of the principle of axiological, methodological, and the principle of the philosophy of Ubuntu in general. So I found that very rich contextually. I also found it very relevant culturally within the context of diversity that we have in the world. Because here we have you from South Africa, myself from Uganda, and we have David from Australia, Melbourne. And then we are all engaged in interpreting realities and building relationship within not a limited time frame, but we are just allowed to keep on going in all directions. And then we had listeners listening in from United States of America, from Kenya, from Congo, from Europe, from South Africa, all over the world. And then all of them were appreciating the kind of conversation we were engaging and the relationship that we were building.
And they were inputting. So it was also a process of the audience participating very much so that we all could learn.
Yeah, co-generation of ideas.
Co-generation
I found
of
it
ideas.
very interesting indeed.
Yes, what I liked about that whole gathering, our session was part of a much wider gathering.
Right.
And this wider gathering was called Unfolding Dialogues, Relational Resources for the Global Good. And to me, that's a very important way of explaining, because what was happening, what you are just saying now in our session as well in the others, is dialogues were unfolding. So ideas emerging in relation as people operate in relation. So it's unfolding dialogues, and we were talking about relational resources, but it's resources for the common good, for the global good. And interestingly, Francis and I are together here in Paris actually at the International Science Council meeting. And one of the core themes of this meeting is to bring scientists from all over the world together in talking about how science can be used for the common good and for the public good. And one of the themes that has been recurring over and over again is how that can be injected into the way in which we do science, the way in which we collaborate. And again, this idea of collaboration across scientists, and by scientists we don't just mean high science so-called in the Western style, because in fact at one of the sessions yesterday that we attended, as you know, this guy from New Zealand themed his talk about indigenous knowledge creation.
Around the Maori people.
And he was saying that the boundaries between so-called science, which is often associated with Western science, and indigenous knowledge generation are porous. So we don't have to interpret that science means doing science in terms of laboratory experiments. Science and knowledge generation can happen in local contexts where people together share experiences and ideas.
Thank you. I think that's so important. I know we need to wrap up. Norma, I like the aspect when you referred to our physical presence in Paris at the International Science Council midterm review meeting, capitalizing on the synergies in science in its broadest context, which also include other multiple disciplines. So
and transdisciplinarity.
And transdisciplinarity, So you can now see the work that the Taos Institute is doing feeding into the work of the International Science Council.
Or resonating with.
Resonating and also feeding into it.
Feeding into it through even our presence.
Yes, yeah.
Because we're involved in the Taos Institute, then we inject ideas in this setting, which also fit in more with relationality.
Absolutely. And then we see how it has contributed to the generation of counter discourses to dominant discourses. Just in the few meetings we had ago, but in the few minutes we had in the last meeting. And then this also connect to the conversation we had at the Taos Institute. The whole notion of appreciating diversity and embracing diversity and celebrating it and then walking the talk. So I found this to be relevant.
That's right. And so the idea ultimately, of course, which the Taos Institute is forwarding through all the various associates, very many associates across the globe, is to explain how relational practices in the end are contributing to making the world better. And a better world in terms of the Taos Institute means a world of more relationality. And that means relationships between people, relationships with Mother Earth, relationships across types of knowing. So in that sense, there's the focus on relationality makes a better world.
Absolutely. Maybe just the last word from me. I know we're running out of time. Now, reflecting on all this importance of relationality in practices, I am just kind of wondering, we see today devastating effect of civil wars and violent conflict in Democratic Republic of Congo, we see in Ukraine, we see in Sudan, we see in multiple parts of the world. I wonder what your reflection is. How can we apply the concept of relationality in advocating for dialogue to achieve more sustainable world?
Yes, well, ideally we would want that. And I know that in some of the talks that the Taos Institute has facilitated, it's called actually What's in the World. They are Wednesday discussions every Wednesday, the first Wednesday of the month, I meant. And at one point, I was really worried when the war had started, and I was becoming very pessimistic. And Alex Arnold, who's actually now the director of the Taos Institute. She took over from another person called Dawn Dahl, who you would have met at our meeting. But Alex said, Norma, there are lots and lots of initiatives of relationality going on. So she was trying to make me feel less pessimistic because she was saying, look at all these people who are helping Ukrainians, that they take in the refugees, they allow them into their homes.
And those advocating for peaceful end to the
conflict.
And
those advocating for peace. So although there is war, on the other hand, there are many people who are trying to introduce positions of relationality just by putting out a hand to other people, and as you say, at global levels, talking about how you can create more peace, trying to generate that. So in that way, one can become a little more optimistic in the face of the war. And even in the face of environmental devastation, what has happened today at the conference, we see many, many people who are doing research on how you can start not just adapting to climate change, but reversing the idea of using the earth as a resource and rather seeing the earth as something to revere, and that's again the relationality. But there's a lot of that kind of research where people are realizing we've got to respect and have awe for Mother Earth and all the bounty of Mother Earth and appreciate Mother Earth, and that's again a relationship of relationality. So it's again going against the exploitation of nature, like you can exploit people and many people have been doing that. You can also develop a different relationship with people and a different relationship with, I'll call it Mother Earth, her Mother Earth.
Yeah, so to sum it up all, I think this all reiterate the profound importance of relationality in our practices and also demonstrate that the principle of relationality being championed by the Taos Institute is not just theoretical, but something that is being practiced at individual level, societal level, organizational level, and governmental level to counter all the adverse negative consequences of human activity that lead to disruption in ways of life, disruption in the environment, in the ecosystem, and it also reinforces the importance of embeddedness and relationship that we have with both the living and the non-living thing.
Right. So maybe we'll say one more statement, and that is that what has happened through my involvement in the Taos Institute, I attended many of the sessions which were held over the years since I became an associate, where authors of books, which are also cutting-edge type books, talk about their books and engage the audience, which is again another way of writing and another way of making a book that's going to have impact, in that you engage the audience in thinking about the issues that you've been exploring in your book. And some of the books, for instance, was a book by Ken Gergen again and Jill Sherto called Beyond the Tyranny of Testing in Education. And this will mean something to you, Francis, that you're not treating the students as people who just need to learn something and then you'll test their knowledge, so-called. It's more looking at how learners can really learn in relationship with each other. So it's not the focus on them being tested individually, it's on the focus of them learning together and feeling that they're learning, again, as a common enterprise, not a competitive enterprise. And that's one of the books that was located by the Taos Institute in helping us to think about the problem of the tyranny of testing. And there was another nice book that I also heard the dialogue with the authors by Defoe, Onfante and Valadares. It was called Dialogue Social Inquiry, and this was actually a Taos Institute publication. So the Taos Institute is also publishing work which is helping people to think about relationality. Then there's the Sage Handbook of Social Constructionist Research, which again, people were invited to speak to the different people who wrote chapters in that book and talk through the implications of social constructionist research. Ken's book on relational imperative was published by the Taos Institute, very well written about relationality in all spheres of life, education, social work, therapy, business, all different spheres, and also what you were talking about, global peace. And he's also written recently, actually, another edition of his Invitation to Social Construction, which is by Sage, and that book also has been highly influential for me, in any case, in my way of perceiving and acting, and also I've been telling my students at UNISA about it. So in that way, you also impact on the world through sharing ideas.
Wonderful.